Amazing turnout on a beautiful day. Shows what we can do for you all, Haley. Haley, I want to thank you personally and Fred Malik personally for helping bring this back to the Aspen Institute.
Walter, thank you. We're glad to be back, and we had a great crowd last year, and are even got a bigger crowd this year. Some years we get this many votes.
Right.
And Aspen.
Nobody knew there were this many Republicans in Aspen either.
Well, we're changing that. Obama's helping.
We'll go there. Well, I have Ambassador Josh Bolton speaking at our other facility right next door. So we are you're being competed with by former Bush administration foreign policy officials. Let me very quickly, I'll start with Governor Lingle because she's new here. Welcome to Aspen. Governor Lingle, everybody probably knows, Governor of Hawaii. We all want to get to know her because one of the
Thank you.
Aspen Institute's plan for world domination involves an Aspen, Hawaii at some point, if we could. You're the first mayor, the first woman, the first person of Jewish ancestry, and the first person since heaven knows when, 40 years ago, to be a Republican governor of Hawaii. It's great to have you here.
Thank you all.
And I think Governor McDonnell, you're new here too. Welcome. Governor McDonnell, I've watched closely because most of the time I have to spend in Washington, alas, so I get to hear a lot of the news, but a great reformer in education, jobs, health care, everything else, plus keeping the budget in balance there. Congratulations. I know you're new, but so far it's been pretty good. I got to know Governor Barbour, who I'd seen him many times before, but when I was involved with the Louisiana Recovery Authority, and he was the definition of a great leader after Hurricane Katrina. And I must say, I saw people who weren't the definition of great leaders also running around. So it was a pleasure to be there. And occasionally I'd come to Gulfport or Biloxi. Something would happen, and you're always very kind. But your great leadership is extended in many fields, also a leader in the education and in fiscal responsibility. Thank you for being back, Governor. Governor Tim Pawlenty, you were here at Aspen Ideas Festival last year. It was a somewhat amusing sight. We were right in front here when Governor Palin decided to resign, and all of a sudden the press was descending upon you, and you were checking your BlackBerry. But it's good to have you back. We hope you'll come back every year. And Governor Pawlenty, besides also showing how to keep a balanced budget, has done some very interesting things on healthcare reform, which containing costs there. So we'll talk about that. And finally, Governor Rick Perry of Texas. Sorry, I haven't looked at this yet, but because I know, but you're just renominated, and you have an election this November, or not a tough one?
There are a lot of important elections.
Yeah, a lot of important elections this November.
Texas only being one of them.
And you're winning the best dressed person on the panel.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
It says martial law has now been declared.
That's right.
I'll explain what that means in a minute. They told me I couldn't wear the one that said secede, so. I tell you what, why wait? Tell us what that T-shirt means, and then we'll get to some substantive issues. This is actually a young country western band in Texas. His name is Martial Law, and so I told him I was going to give him a little national exposure today at the Aspen Institute. So, Martial Law, great band. Martial Law.
Well, we're used to having product placement deals here, and it's good to know that it's a good band.
That's what the Republican Party's all about. It's about economic development.
Exactly.
And I might just add, since I've got the floor, kind of took
Make
it.
my job easy.
Yeah, is Bob McDonnell is going to be a rock star in Republican governors. This guy is awesome. And if you want to see a product about what RGA does, is Chris Christie and Bob are two good examples of it. And Bob, you were Attorney General for what?
4 years.
4 years prior, and working in Virginia. And CNBC has has it been for the last 4 years, 5, 6 years? They've ranked the states, and Virginia has always been one of those top states. And day before yesterday, I guess, Bob called me and sheepishly relinquished his #1 title to Texas. So, and they were #2.
But yeah,
So,
Virginia was #2. This is states best to do business
right,
in.
states best
so
to do
we have
business in.
#1 and #2.
And number 8.
And
number 8. And I actually know Mississippi should be #1.
Yeah.
And Hawaii is definitely the most fun to do business in. So heck, we got everything
But
covered.
it's really pretty interesting when you look at the states that are either at the top or moving upward. It's Republican leadership, and it's really because of these individuals do what they say they're going to do, and they have taxes that are low, regulatory climate that's fair and balanced, legal systems. Haley passed one of the most sweeping tort reforms in America a couple of 3 years ago, and they understand that you've got to continue to have accountable public schools and fund them appropriately. The accountability part of it's really important because that says to those of you that are risk takers, job creators out there, that the skilled workforce is going to be in there if you decide to build a $600 million capital infusion into a particular state. So, and it's really interesting when you look across America, the states that are leading that charge, the states that are heading in the right direction, it's Republicans, and you know
we will have Democratic governors here later in the summer.
It is.
So
it
we're
is
a
what it is.
nonpartisan.
Well, I
institute.
hope it is. I hope you will ask them about that and why they're letting Texas and Virginia kick their butts.
Governor McDonnell, you were going to answer that.
Well, what Governor Perry didn't tell you is that just as an act of courtesy, since he's running for re-election and I'm not, we slacked off a little bit this year, but next year it's over. We'll be back on top.
Yeah. Let me start with Governor Barbour because you and I and Governor Perry all come from Gulf Coast oil-producing states. The BP announced this afternoon that they finally stopped the flow of oil. Temporary. I mean, they haven't done the relief well, but the cap is tight. What lessons?
Well, let me say first of all, so people understand, what BP's done is they've shut down the well with a cap, but right now they're testing the pressures to make sure that they have the integrity of the well bore. This is not necessarily permanent. May be permanent, could lead to permanent, but I think everybody ought to know that. But right now there's no new oil coming into the Gulf of Mexico, but we still have a lot of oil to deal with, and we'll have to deal with it. What are the lessons learned? I think when we look back, it's going to be pretty clear that the typical, normal, standard protocols were not followed on this well, and that this was a bad, difficult well anyway, and that's going to be why we had this oil spill. Rick and I and Alabama and Louisiana, our 4 states have allowed offshore drilling for more than 50 years. More than 30,000 oil wells have been drilled in the Gulf of Mexico in those 50 years, and this is the first time anything like this has happened. So the idea to us of having a moratorium or to stop drilling is a stupid idea. When you when a plane crashes, we don't shut down the airlines for 6 months while we're trying to figure out why. But let's talk about what has happened. We've had a tremendous amount of oil that has come into the Gulf. A lot of it has been cleaned up. Some of it is loose in the Gulf. Some of it is not there any longer because, believe it or not, there are actually microorganisms in the sea that eat oil. And when you read these stories about where there had been a lot of oil, the oxygen level is down a little bit. It's because of these microorganisms. That means that they've been in there eating oil. Interestingly, the Gulf of Mexico, 250,000 to 1 million barrels of oil seeps into the Gulf of Mexico through the floor every year. Now, that doesn't diminish the importance of this. We don't know if as much as has gone in now is so much that the Gulf can't digest it or how it will deal with it, but I do think we need to know what the facts are. The facts are there have been more than 30,000 wells drilled. The facts are that more than 30% of the oil produced in the United States last year was produced in the Gulf of Mexico. Of that, more than 80% was deep water production. So if you're like me, not a math major, That means that a fourth of all the oil our country produced last year was deep water, Gulf of Mexico oil that the president wants to stop drilling for. Now, where does that put us? Where we use 25% less oil? I don't think so. It means we're going to import a whole lot more oil, something we've been trying to get away from for 40 years, and something we need to get away from. But for those of you who think the most important thing here are the environmental issues, and they are critically important, let me remind you of the 10 worst oil spills in American history. 1 has been from a well. 7 have been from tankers. 7 out of 10 have been tankers carrying oil like we're going to have more of if we stop drilling in the Gulf. And finally, one was the BP pipeline in Alaska in the mid-90s, and the other was the Murphy Oil Refinery, which was overcome by Katrina on the Louisiana Gulf Coast when it blew out the refinery. So we're very glad the well's shut in, at least temporarily. We believe the solution's at hand to keep it shut in permanently, even without a relief well. But we think critical to the country's future, not just to more jobs in Louisiana, Walter, but to the country's future, is that we continue to have this huge source of American energy that we can use in our country instead of having to import more energy.
Governor Perry, you're still in favor of more drilling off the Texas coast?
Sure, and it gets back to, Haley gave a great example that most people can understand with the aviation aspect of it. And, I don't think we as a country have done enough to study this issue, to go through all of the different technology aspects. And it's one of the things that we did within the last 2 weeks in Texas, is to bring all of the industry experts and our institutions of higher learning. Obviously, when you have the University of Texas and Rice Institute and Texas A&M, those have some extraordinary engineering, petroleum engineering programs, and we're putting it all together, and it's called the Gulf Project. And over the course of the next 6 months to a year, we suspect, and we certainly hope and pray, that there will be a number of major new initiatives and directives that come out of this, technology, et cetera, on how to be able to continue to drill in the deep seas, both safely and expeditiously, and here's why this is so important. The concept of having a moratorium is so it's such a knee-jerk and a bad knee-jerk reaction. Is that we have an economy that's very fragile right now all around the world, and particularly in the United States. And you put that additional impact on our economy, plus, and I'm sure we're going to talk about cap and trade and the additional burden that would put upon the oil and gas industry and Americans. I mean, the president himself said that energy prices would necessarily skyrocket. So when cap and trade is put into place. In Texas, it will cost us about 360,000 jobs.
Let me throw it to the panel, though, on not just cap and trade, but the question of whether or not we should reduce the use of, say, oil and other fossil fuels, and if so, what's the best way to do it?
Well, Walter, maybe I can ask the audience to think of this in a context that's different than what you hear about in political debates and public policy discussions, and that is, let's take electricity. And most people, when they talk about energy in America, they talk about windmills and nuclear and solar photovoltaics and wave energy and a variety of different sources. But the fact is, only 2% of America's electricity is produced by oil. Only 2%. Our nation's dependency on oil is because of the near monopoly involved with vehicle transportation. Mm-hmm. Transportation generally, but most specifically, cars and trucks pretty much run on some fuel that comes from oil. And so when you hear these public policy debates and people talking about nuclear or not, they're missing the point entirely. because I've just told you that 98% of America's energy does not come from oil. I look at this issue of energy and oil as a national security issue, as opposed to an environmental issue. And if we make the right decisions to keep our country secure and make certain that our foreign policy is not being driven by our need for a particular commodity, the environment will necessarily be cleaner, because that means using other kinds of fuels for vehicles. And it means requiring the automakers in this country to have flex fuel vehicles, which cost about $100 per car to make this transition so that your car could run on any kind of fuel. And remember this about this oil, and I appreciate the oil states and the drilling that people talk about in America, but oil is a fungible product. If we produce more oil in America, OPEC will produce less oil. Only 1/4 of the oil imports coming into America are from the Middle East anyway. The top 10 producers of oil in the world are governments. We need to break the addiction to oil as it relates to transportation fuels. Electricity is not the issue.
And so you would basically have fuel standards for autos as one thing.
Open fuel standards combined with electric vehicles as well. You need to have the plug-in hybrid vehicles along with the flex fuel capability.
Governor Tim Pawlenty, sorry.
Well, first of all, Walter, thanks for having us back. We sure appreciate it. And thank you all for coming this afternoon on this beautiful summer day and for being here as part of this discussion. On the energy issue, one aspect of it, of course, is baseload energy in the United States. And if you look at a pie chart for where our baseload energy comes from in America, it's about half coal, it's about 20% nuclear, it's about 20% natural gas, and the rest of it, that remaining 10%, is miscellaneous, some renewable and other stuff. I think under this administration in this Congress, they are going to effectively put a lid on further development or expansion of coal. I hope they don't do it. I hope they continue to work on new and improved ways to continue to advance the cause of coal in the United States, clean coal, but nobody has quite figured that out at a scalable and economical basis yet. We approved a state-of-the-art, best-of-class, best available technology coal plant. It was going to be built in South Dakota, but they had to run the lines through Minnesota. We approved it, and within 30 or 60 days of our approval, the Obama administration shut it down, basically, by putting a hold on it. So I don't think they're going to allow, under this regime, that expansion in that area. I think notwithstanding the lip service that they're going to pay towards expansion of nuclear through loan guarantees in Georgia, they are effectively not going to significantly allow significant expansion of nuclear. If those two things are true, and you believe that renewables have a limit on their current technology, they make sense to a point, but we got to focus those renewables on those things that are economical and technologically scalable, and frankly, a lot of them have plateaued. That leaves natural gas. So I think what's going to happen under this administration and this construct is you're going to have enormous back pressure on natural gas. That's the challenge. Now, the good news is, in recent years, the United States and North America more broadly has found massive new deposits of natural gas or previously undiscovered natural gas, and technologies to get at it a different way, to the point where there are predictions that we have 100 years or more of enough natural gas to serve the entire baseload energy needs of the United States of America. It's cleaner, it's Americanized, and it's relevant to Linda's point for this reason. Everybody focuses on cars, as we should on the oil side, but if biofuels are going to have their limits, as they do currently, then it really leads you to plug-in electric hybrids. And when you plug your car into the wall, the electricity actually has to come from somewhere, which leads you back to baseload energy.
But I'm sorry, so your energy policy would be to emphasize natural gas and natural gas electricity utilities and a smart grid.
Well, my personal energy policy is don't let go of coal, develop clean coal and continue to use it. We have a 250-year supply of it in the United States. Move aggressively into expanding nuclear and then exploit natural gas. What I'm saying, though, is under this administration and this Congress, it's all going to, by default, back into natural gas.
Let me get to Governor McDonnell, if I may.
I think Governor Pawlenty summed it up pretty well. I think there's one thing that most Americans agree on all sides of the political spectrum, and that is that increasing America's energy independence so we don't rely on Venezuela and Iran and others for our major sources of energy is is something that we need to do. Coming from a coal-producing state, which is 53% of the baseload power in Virginia, we're very concerned about these policies like cap and trade and bans on surface mining and mountaintop mining and so forth that are coming out of the EPA now with this administration. So the question is whether the government policies at both state but particularly the federal level are conducive to supporting the free market to allow American innovators to come up with the alternatives in the long run are going to make sense. I think Tim's analysis of where the power is coming from is very instructive, and why for the foreseeable future we're going to rely on fossil fuels, which was your question. Coal, natural gas, and nuclear make up overwhelming 90+%. Here's the problem. You've got cap and trade and these bans on mining. You've got government interference now with some of the new fracking operations for natural gas, which has revolutionized the gas industry to allow us to extract from coal bed methane, which was being flared in the atmosphere 25 years ago, now is the major source, 80% in Virginia. You've got nuclear power, which should provide an enormous expansion in our options. France has got 75% of their power. We've got 23% in America, and we've got policies at the federal level that say we're closing Yucca Mountain, and we don't want to have good policies for reprocessing of spent rods. I mean, it's stifling the nuclear industry. And so I understand that the push for alternatives, we need to do it, but with only 3% of alternatives coming there, only 3% of our power coming from alternatives, and on average those alternatives being 2 times plus the average cost per kilowatt hour to produce electricity as the traditional sources, we've got a ways to go. So in the short run, I think the policies have got to support the traditional sources, but making them cleaner.
Let me ask you, I'm sorry, Governor Barbour.
To kind of wrap up what you see here is Republican governors, they're 24. Virtually every one of them will support all sources of energy. That we ought to use all of the above, including one of the biggest is save efficiency and savings. Today, the average home in the United States uses 30% as much natural gas as it used 40 years ago. And nobody's changed their life if they have natural gas in there. They just have become more efficient.
Let me go back to you, Governor Barbour, though, because last year you discussed it, and I'd love to open it to the panel. Nobody yet has mentioned the issue of climate change. And I'd love you to discuss whether you think that putting the amount of carbon and burning the amount of carbon-based fuels is likely enough to be causing a climate change that's worrisome, that's a reason to cut back on the burning of carbon-based fuels, or not?
Let me just say, Walter, I'm a conservative. I really am a conservative, and a conservative would look at this and say, let's do the reasonable things we can do to reduce greenhouse gases, but let's don't destroy our economy, let's don't destroy jobs, let's don't drive the costs up so that the American people can't afford to have the energy that they have today. But my state is the first in the country to have under permitting and ready to start construction a coal-fired power plant with carbon capture and sequestration on a commercial scale. Mm-hmm. We have under construction our plant in our state, a solar panel power plant deal. Those are the kind of things that will help incrementally, but they're not going to destroy the economy. Cap and trade would destroy the economy.
Right. Let me open it up to the panel. Do any of you all worry about climate change?
Not to confuse the audience because of what I just said about the issue being the vehicle transportation, Hawaii is unique in America. 90% of our electricity, 90% of our electricity comes from burning oil. So we are involved in the most massive transition from an oil-based economy for electricity to renewables with a goal of 70% clean energy by 2030. The 70% would break down 40% renewables, 30% efficiencies. If we do the right things, the smart things, by the very nature of our actions, you're going to have less greenhouse gases. You're going to have a cleaner environment. And I think Haley's point is we are not willing, as Republican governors, to destroy the economy because we believe it would put less carbon into the atmosphere. And we live in a world that's global. I just returned from China a couple of weeks ago. China produces greenhouse gases, Indonesia, India. We're not just sitting on the planet by ourselves. So to knowingly put ourselves into a position vis-a-vis these other nations where our competitiveness as a nation is completely destroyed, which means jobs would be lost, families would be hurt. We're not willing to do that so we can prove that we were the first to reduce greenhouse gases by some arbitrary figure. But our policies that we're discussing with you today will lead to that result, ultimately. And that's the smarter thing to do if you're worried about your nation, as opposed to worried about a theoretical, good-feeling kind of a concept.
Let me ask the
Thank you, Harry.
Let me ask the panel what I would call a totally free market question. That in a good, honest, free market, you also try to price some externalities. And the externalities of things like oil are both the security interests of, helping to fund either petro-dictators from, Venezuela to the Saudi Arabia, and also, to some extent, you all may disagree, greenhouse gas emissions. Should we, I know everybody on this panel is against cap and trade, but should we have some mechanism for pricing carbon, the externalities? In other words, use a market mechanism to reduce our use of carbon-based fuels.
Not in my opinion.
Okay.
Well, and I don't want to.
I'm going to let Governor Lingle and then Governor Pawlenty.
This point, and I think Tim has a very, very good grasp of this issue. I would say, to the extent you do agree there should be a carbon tax, there has to be an offset in payroll taxes in some way, because a carbon tax hurts the people who can least afford to pay more for the necessities of life. So a carbon tax in isolation would be a disaster for those people who are struggling to make it in America today. So if you want to implement that, if you believe that's a good policy, as opposed to the approach of taking the proper actions which will lead to less carbon in the environment, if you believe in a carbon tax, you have to have at least an identical offset as far as the impact on families and businesses.
Tim?
Yeah, Walter, this is an issue I think all of us have thought about and looked at and studied for a number of years, and I've come to this conclusion, and it echoes and it mirrors what Haley said. We can all be and should be in favor of doing those things that reduce pollution, but those things have to be economically rational, not wreck the economy, and be based on free market principles and concepts, and also rely upon the things that have always gotten us through the next challenge, which is invention, innovation, productivity enhancements, and the like. I don't think to put it in your terms, an external cost on carbon emissions is a good way to go or a smart way to go.
I'm sorry, why wouldn't that do the exact thing you just talked about, is price it right in the market?
Well, first of all, the economy can't absorb that, especially now. I mean,
even with Governor Lingle's, you rebate it?
Well, and I respect Linda's view on that, except you can't mirror the costs imposed on certain sectors and the price back out, I don't think, very well. The idea that the federal government, through a tax scheme or a cap and trade scheme, is going to drag a regulatory framework into Washington, D.C., and have a top-down command and control set of decisions.
Okay, but actually I was asking
on the economy,
the opposite of that, which is just let the market do it.
Well, then who's going to dole out the rebates, to what level and to what degree?
I agree with Tim, Walter, that it'd be very difficult to quantify, because that cost just filters through the economy. I mean, to businesses, to families. I'm just saying, if you go in that direction, you have to have some kind of an offset.
Or Governor McDonnell, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, somebody needs to say this. My name is Rick Perry, and I am a global warming skeptic. And I say that, and I say that because I think the jury is still out on human-driven global warming. Now, while that's going on, and I happen to have the great privilege of governing a state that is a very big economy. I think we would be the 11th largest economy in the world if we were a standalone country. And while this debate has been raging, about CO2, and I think that's the issue. There are some pollutants out there that are very harmful to the people in this country, like ozone, like nitric oxide, NOx. And while this debate has been raging about, whether is it man that is driving this, or is this globe so big and so complex that man may have some part in the driving of the CO2 levels. But what are you doing about the real pollutants? And in the decade of the 2000s, the state of Texas, using incentive-based regulations, reduced the NOx levels in Texas by 53%. We reduced the ozone level in the state of Texas by 22%. Our water is cleaner in the state of Texas than it was in 1970. And I might add that we did that in the 2000s. At the same time, we were creating more jobs than any other state in the nation. I thought that was the goal, to be able to be economically prosperous and to clean up your environment at the same time. And you can do it. And I think there is some models for that across the country, Texas being one of them. But the fact of the matter is we need to not be distracted on this issue of man-made global warming and put our economy at such a, we were in China the week after you were there, Linda, and they're putting some pollutants in the air, folks, real stuff.
Let me get Governor McDonnell in, if I may.
I'm pretty worried about climate change. My first month in office, we had 3 blizzards and 60 inches of snow in Northern Virginia. So I think Governor Perry is right on. I think it's respecting the free markets, not punishing the traditional carbon-based industries, but incentivizing the growth in the alternative sector. In Virginia alone, I think the Heritage Foundation did a study and estimated that it would cost an average of $1,700 for a family of 4, the increase in electricity bills if a cap-and-trade system went in place. That's not sustainable. It would devastate Southwest Virginia, which is heavily reliant on the coal industry. I think the better alternative is to some of the incentives for wind, solar, biomass, waste to energy, those kinds of things that over the long term, when they're cost effective, people will make the choices either because of their view of social responsibility or because it makes economic sense to go to those. Governor Pawlenty had some incentives in Minnesota that we adopted this session of the General Assembly to provide tax credits for jobs in those renewable energy areas. We put that in place, and we're now starting to see some of these offshore wind companies coming to Virginia. A tremendous expansion in biodiesel in Southside Virginia as tobacco wanes. People turning Hardee's sugarcane and switchgrass into biodiesel that you can drink or put in your engine. I mean, that's pretty good.
You in favor of biodiesel?
Yeah, look, I'm an all of the above energy guy, with the exception of corn-based ethanol. I think that's a sham, but all of the above. We started 6 years ago a very massive wind energy development in Texas, and today we're the #1 wind energy producing state in the country, passing up California, I think 3 years ago. We produce more wind energy in the state of Texas than all but 4 other countries. So the idea that we have done it through using incentives. We have given the private sector incentives to go and develop the type of technology, and I don't know, whether one of you talked about that, letting the free market have the ability to go out and to experiment. I mean, Bob and I joke with each other, as do the rest of us governors, about competition, but competition between the states is what's going to be the savior of America.
Well, let me ask about, go ahead,
cap
Kevin.
and trade. I think as a practical matter, it's a dead issue. The Congress doesn't have the will or the desire to pass it now, and given the likely results of November, they're not going to pass it. So we're not here, but generally the country is spinning its wheels talking about something that's dead.
This is
It
why I
isn't
keep
going to
not
happen.
raising it.
And we need to move the discussion to something that is more pragmatic, namely the technology and the incentives that's actually going to make some progress on the concern. And then beyond that, at the same time that the country has now turned against it and Congress is not going to pass it, you have an unelected bureaucracy in the form of the EPA trying to impose it or major elements of it through regulation, which we all, I think, have opposed, the EPA doing that. And that's a major disconnect.
Haley?
Do you want to change the subject, Walter?
Yes, but that's all right.
But you should know, Tim, I was right where Tim was yesterday. Yesterday, Harry Reid's office announced that they're going to try to have an energy bill by July the 26th. Yeah. That's the fruits of them passing this financial services reform bill that does nothing about the things that caused the financial crisis in 2007-8, is that they think they got a hot hand, and so they're going to try, according to Reid's office, to try to have a bill that would include greenhouse gases, cap and trade, if the newspapers are to be believed. Change the subject, Walter.
I was going to change to education, my passion, K through 12 education. And Governor Perry talked about competition. And as you know, Governor Barbour, with your friend Jim Barksdale and many others, we helped, after Katrina, take the New Orleans school system, which was the worst, and make it a competition school system, where 70% of the kids are now in charter schools, and the schools compete in order to get students. And it's basically a voucher system. Students and parents get to pick which school, and the money follows the pupil, which has caused schools to do things like stay open till 6 p.m., so they get more students, uniforms, everything else. All of you have been great education reformers. Why has there not been, in one of your states, the notion of let's break the monopoly of public school systems and allow competition as a pure form, not just a few charters, and I know Governor Pawlenty has done a lot of charters, so you've been a leader there, but say let's just change the whole system and allow free competition in K through 12 education.
Can you see the tracks?
Yeah.
On my back?
From what?
I tried that in
NEA?
2001.
We've all
From the
We've all
unions?
tried it. We've all
Walter,
tried. I mean, I've been one of the most profound, outspoken private school voucher guys in the country. And, I mean, you can't believe in competition against states and not believe in competition between private public schools.
Governor Lingle?
Or private and public schools. But
It's not a secret why it hasn't happened. It's the power of the teacher labor unions in this country. And
Have a hurricane.
and their influence at the state legislature. There's no doubt, everyone knows, everyone here on the panel, everybody who's a governor of any state knows where the power lies, and that means that the focus isn't on the children, it's on the adults, and that is a fundamental problem. And I want to share from my recent visit to China to show you how student-focused China is, and don't mistake that our competition is not between Colorado and Texas and Mississippi. Our competition is in India and in China, and that's the competition for our children. The week I was in China was the week of the national testing for every high school student to determine which college they got to go to.
Awesome
and during
stuff.
that week, in the newspaper every day, both the Chinese language, the American language paper put out by the government, that entire week, all the major construction projects in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou are shut down because they don't want to disturb the children while they're studying for their exams. No divorce petitions are accepted by the court. This is true. No divorce petitions in the run-up to these exams are accepted by the nation's courts. Every taxi driver in the country sees a kid on their way to these exams. If they're running late, you're mandated to pick them up for free. Now, you might say, well, of course, a command and control government, they can do these things. Well, they can. It's not an ideological discussion. The fact is they are doing these things, and that's who we're competing against, arguing whether or not you can shut down a failing school. Why should there be a discussion about shutting down and retraining a teacher? You can retrain a teacher, but shut the school down in the meantime. Get the kids into a school that has competent teachers and go forward. So I'm with you, Walter, and I had a chance to talk with Scott Cowan quite a lot.
Oh, yeah, he's a fan of yours.
Down in Louisiana about what they did with the charters. And it's
Scott Cowan's the president of Tulane, a shout out for a great university.
He's a great guy and did a phenomenal job down there with the charter schools. So sometimes out of disaster, something very good happens. But let's not wait as a nation for the disaster of losing completely our competitiveness before we will stand up and say, look, we've got to put the children first.
Haley and I would not recommend a hurricane, but there are silver linings. Tim.
Well, a couple of years ago, Time magazine had on its cover the Dropout Nation. So the United States of America in these modern times, with 1/3 of all of our high school kids in the United States of America dropping out of high school. So a generation or two ago, if you were my mom or my dad or my grandma or my grandpa and you didn't touch the educational rung for whatever reason, disadvantaged, disrespected, disconnected, disenfranchised, as long as you weren't disabled, you could go get, the strong back job, as my dad called it. Those jobs are gone. You got to have an education or a skill, or you can't access the economy of today or tomorrow. And if you drop out of high school, you are marginalized immediately, and you become in whole or part a ward of the state. As conservatives and as Americans, we should be very concerned about that, because if you don't have an education or skill, then the call comes for more government housing, more government transportation, more government health care, more government everything. And the reason that call comes in part is because the people who are asking for it can't afford it themselves. And we cannot be a successful nation with 1/3 of our people uneducated, unskilled, and angry, and mostly in areas of concentrated disadvantage. And the thing that is standing between tipping this system over for the better and this 1940s industrial, mindless, assembly line, seniority-based system that we have now is primarily the teacher unions. And so we need to stand up. We've all tried it. We've all had various degrees of success, but there is no question, there's no sugarcoating it. They are blocking most of the major reforms in the education discussion in the United States of America. Minnesota is very fortunate. We have the highest ACT scores in the country, some of the highest high school graduation rates. Our math and science scores, if we were a country by ourselves, are top 10 in the world. But that's only true on average. If you go to the disadvantaged areas of concentration.
And you now tied teacher assessments to school and student scores.
But that's not enough, Walter. That's good. It's a good start, and it's one thing that'll help, and we've done a lot of other things. But unless and until we open up this system, so the same dynamics that make everything else work in life, namely competition, rigor, accountability.
But I'm sorry, that's what was my question. Why haven't you done that?
We have tried. I proposed it, but the teacher union, the teachers are good folks, they don't make too much money, but the unions who own the franchise, who own the monopoly.
You can't get it through the legislature?
No. My legislature is run by Democrats. If you're a Democrat and you cross the teacher unions, you're going to have heck to pay.
Governor McDonnell, you've been quiet. I got to get you in here.
10 years, there's been a number of bills in Virginia just to effectuate some reforms like tuition tax credits. And for the reasons that Tim and Linda have said, the opposition from the unions, they failed. This year, we had a pretty broad education reform agenda in Virginia, passed a dramatically improved charter school bill, created college lab schools, created virtual schools. And so we're trying to create competition, at least within the public school system. That's going to help a little bit. The thing that I'm most worried about is where America stands with regard to training young people for the high-tech jobs of tomorrow, the STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, math, healthcare. Looking at those Asian and Pacific Rim countries, the work ethic that those young people have over there, the number of engineers and scientists and mathematicians they graduate per capita compared to America is staggering. We ranked, I think, now as low as 20th in the industrialized world. It is a horrible trend for the future of America, for our view of American exceptionalism. If we're going to stay strong and support the military and be a leader in technology and biotechnology, we have got to reverse this trend, whether it's through more competition or just making sure we're focusing on these areas that are going to keep America strong.
Would you be willing to give a visa to every STEM graduate from another country who wanted to move to America?
Well, first of all, that'll be the federal government. They have to make that decision. But I tell you, that's the kind of immigration we need. I think that's the... I think the solution long-term on that area is to increase the number of B-1B and other visas to America, right, but focus the approvals on the economic needs of America. If we need more construction workers, nuclear physicists, doctors, then those are the people you allow to come to America legally, because you know they will contribute to the economic health of a country going forward. And the answer is, yeah, I'd like to see a lot more of those people, but not to compete with Americans.
Sorry, Haley.
I would just say, well, there's hardly anything that's been said I wouldn't agree with. There are two things I think we ought to face up to. First of all, quality of education is not about money. In my state, the people who consider themselves pro-education are for whoever wants to spend the most money. And some of the worst schools in my state, just like some of the worst schools in America, the District of Columbia, are the highest spending schools. And we got to understand, that's not an argument for spending less money, but it's an argument to understand this is about a hell of a lot more money. The second thing that we have a very bad understanding about is this. There's some Mississippians here. Marcia and I got 2 boys. Reeves is 30. If 12 years ago Marcia had gone to the beauty parlor and said, Reeves has decided he's not going to go to Ole Miss, he's going to go to Holmes Community College, and he's going to get a skill. Now, what would they have said to Marcia at the beauty parlor? Well, Marcia, what's wrong with him? We have so stigmatized the non-university path in the United States. And look, I look around this room, I suspect the children of virtually everybody in this room probably are very good prospects to go to university. But we have millions of kids who are not. But they're taught in K through 12 schools, if they don't, there's something wrong with them. So they go up and for a year and a half and waste a few $1,000s of their mom and daddy's money, become failures at age 19 or 20, and get sent out to kind of figure out how to work through that. We need in America's system post K through 12 a very well-defined way that you could get your skills, get whatever those kind of skills are that you're interested in, there's need for, and then have a certificate that you can do something, and then go out in the job market. Because today the certificate for getting an interview is to have a bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. And for most of the jobs, it doesn't have a thing in the world to do with whether you do that job right, including, you know, we need some really smart PhDs in science, technology, engineering, and math to create the jobs, the pathways, the technologies. But we need 100 times that many to deploy them. And that's where we're really falling down. And if you don't think that makes some kids drop out of high school in the 9th grade because they don't know what algebra's got to do with them, and the idea that they're going to college, nobody in their family ever went to college, they think that's a joke. And that's one of the reasons that our dropout rate is a third. I think Tim's probably right. I'll close with one thought. Mike Huckabee and I were governors together, and we have every 2 years in Memphis, we have all the governors of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi have a joint press deal. Huckabee said, compared to 25 years ago, 3 times more Arkansas high school graduates go on to college as compared to 25 years ago. And then he said, compared to 25 years ago, the same number graduate.
Right. Well, we used to be number 1 in the world in that. I have many other questions on financial reform, health care, keeping costs down in government, but it may surprise you on the panel to know that there's nobody in the town of Aspen who ever says, I haven't heard Walter ask enough questions. So I'm going to go to the audience and let them. Yes, sir, right there. Just shout it out and microphones will catch up with you. Yes, Ed Levy from Detroit, Michigan. The microphone's in front of you.
Thank you. And I've been listening to what's being said here about education. I've been interested in education for a long time as a citizen. And I live in a state, in a town that has horrible education problems, as you know. And I've discovered one thing. And you all have alluded to it, but you haven't really come right down to the point on it. And that is that the teachers' unions have rented politicians in all of these states, and that's the reason why you're not able to get legislation like this through your government processes.
That's
now,
a good point. That's been
okay. And the more I think about this, the more disgusted and angry I become about it. And I've decided there's one thing I personally am going to do. I happen to be a third-generation Republican, so I have the habit of supporting Republicans. And I was born with it, I think. But what I found out is that there are Republicans and there are Republicans when it comes to education. Yeah. And if you look at their sources of political funding, you find that there are a surprising number of Republicans who've taken union money, particularly teachers' union money, in big quantities. I won't support people like that anymore. And I think,
Does anybody up here want to touch on that?
well, and I just want to finish this one last thing. And I think that what politically needs to happen is the game of name and shame for politicians who have taken money from the people who have stalled the progress of our education system.
Did you want to, or I think it's a good comment. We get on to the next question. I will say that we've tried hard to get, I'm chair of the board of Teach for America, to get Teach for America in Detroit, and we can't for some of the reasons you've talked about.
May I just say,
Yeah.
Your Teach for America kids, they're not kids anymore. I mean, they get out of college. They are tremendous. We have over 100 in the state of Hawaii.
I know.
And they are bringing the shame to the more veteran teachers.
It's also a movement that helps
They are
education
tremendous.
reform, and in the Delta country, I always go down to Haley's Delta country. We've
They're
got some
terrific.
great core members.
But also remember the number one determining factor of how a child's going to do in school is their parents. And we shouldn't forget that as the starting point of the discussion. And there's a number of strategies around making sure they're empowered and engaged as well. The second most important determining factor of how a child's going to do in school is the quality and effectiveness and preparedness of their teachers. There's a whole agenda around reforming teacher preparation, teacher recruitment, teacher accountability, teacher dismissal, teacher discipline, and the like that needs to be implemented. And then lastly, on this issue, Ed, that you raised, in Washington, D.C., they had a modest, but in scope, but significant in substance, scholarship program for poor children in the worst, one of the worst, maybe the worst school district in the United States of America. Quietly, in the first few months of this administration and this Congress, they voted to abolish it. These are the same people who run around and say, we want to help the poor, we want to help the disadvantaged, we want to help those who are disenfranchised from this economy. The best thing that they could do for those individuals in those circumstances is to make sure they have an education or a skill to be able to access the economy in a hyper-competitive global world. And every time they have a chance, they stomp out meaningful reform that would help those very children.
Right there. Yeah, stand up. The microphone's right behind you. Oh, I'm sorry, the woman with the, I'm sorry, I thought you were a mic runner.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But the guy in front of you comes next, because I
Okay.
made a mistake.
I am Dr. Deborah Levy. I've been working for the past 3 years with children in poverty, going to probably the most poverty-stricken schools in Florida. And what is very heartbreaking to me is the number one problem why these children aren't finishing high school is because they can't read. And what is happening is we are teaching to the test, and the children can't pass the test. I would see high school boys who had failed 3 times, kids making fun of them, until you get in there, and when we would work with them, train the teachers, teach them to read, it would change their life. They would, but
Yeah.
you have to teach to the skill and not to the test, and that's
Let
the
me ask you,
problem.
too, if I could ask you to give the microphone to the person right in front of you, too, and let him make a comment, and then we'll, yeah.
Republican Governor Bobby Jindal just signed a bill into law that allows guns into churches, and I just wanted to know if any of you found that bill to be contradictory.
All right, go ahead. Governor McDonnell, you first.
You gonna ask me?
Yeah, I'm going to get you.
I got mine on me now.
I'm unfamiliar with it.
That's
Y'all
why I
allow
was
'em up
going to
here,
make
don't
you
you?
go
Oh,
last.
good,
Yeah.
that's good.
We're a very strong Second Amendment state, but I actually prefer the Bibles and the hymn books in the church.
Haley? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Governor.
Yeah, in our state, we have very open gun laws, but they do have places that you can't carry guns. Schools, libraries, and I don't think anybody's ever accused the Republicans or the Democrats in Mississippi for not being pro-Second Amendment, but we haven't had that one come up yet.
Well, I know that Rick Perry will be much more entertaining on this topic than I will. So I'm going to address the
I
teach
always
to the test
save the
issue,
best
Walter,
for
if I,
Oh, yeah,
if I
I'm sorry,
could
Governor Lingle,
instead.
yeah.
Yeah, I've heard this before about it's bad to teach to the test, but the way you get to high school without being able to read is not teaching to the test. Because if you were testing children in first and second and third and fourth grade on whether they could read or not, you wouldn't have them getting to high school. And I spent 10 years as a Chapter 1 reading tutor on the island of Maui, and I worked with kids in the third and the fourth grade. These were supposedly disadvantaged kids. And I'm just a volunteer. I'm not a professional teacher, but they test them at the beginning. They test them at the end of the year to see, has this helped to have someone working one-on-one with you? And the fact is, it does help. And they are able to, not just to read, but to comprehend better. So I think this phrase, it's bad to teach to the test, it's just not rational. It's not, and I really appreciate you being in the schools and helping students who are in poverty, but it just doesn't make any sense in a world where to even apply for a civil service job, you have to take a test. To get into the Hawaii National Guard, we have so many young people because they can't pass the test. I asked finally our Adjutant General, I'd like to see the test. Why is it so tough? Well, it's not. It's really not. So I like the idea of teaching to the test with young people. I also like teaching critical thinking later on. So it's not all test taking, but if you would test students early and often and catch it when there's a problem, you get it resolved
Now,
at a young age.
I'm going to allow Tim to either answer the education question or the guns question, but Governor Perry, you're going to have to do the guns one.
Well, quickly on the gun question, I think I'm the only current governor who signed the concealed carry law twice. Once when we passed it originally, and once when it got thrown out by the court and we reinstated it. And there were all these claims about shootouts in the West. You know, we're going to have all these major problems in Minnesota. There have been more people killed in Minnesota by our new commuter rail line than legal permit holders during a comparable time period. The entire claim against it has been completely false and debunked. We've had no, or next to no
I will not go into the problems with your
and
commuter
as
rail
to churches,
line,
and like Haley's, we don't allow them in certain places, and if you aren't in that category and you don't want them, you can post a sign and keep them out. But Rick, I'll set this up for Rick. He was walking his dog recently in Texas, and what?
I don't walk dogs.
All right. Any event, a coyote threatened his little, is it a little poodle?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he had his pooper scooper in a pink bag.
On second thought, why don't you not set this up?
And some coyotes came out, and you can take it from there.
Yeah, right. Ma'am, we test in Texas. We think it is very important. You know, we got away from testing in the state of Texas. We got into all this social promotion stuff back in the late 80s and the 90s, and we are recovering our public schools in the state of Texas. We are making progress, and you have to, and we don't have unions in Texas, and so you can just send the campaign contribution to Texans for Rick Perry, Austin, Texas, I'll get it, and because they don't support me because we don't have them in Texas. But the fact is, this is, I mean, being able to test the children, and look, when you go through life, and Linda said it right, you're going to be tested. And the idea that we start telling kids that, you know, oh, don't worry about it, you're not going to be tested is just, you know, you're leading them down a path that's going to hurt them. Right. But to teach to the test. Right.
Yeah. The point was that sometimes they need to have special instructions. The teachers are not always trained. And we really do want to thank you for your service to schools. It would help if everybody got more involved.
Hey, let me address the issue of guns just a minute, because I didn't ever get to talk about it. It's one of my favorite subjects. I'm a big believer that, you know, the most of us out there are sheep, and we go about our business and we want to be left alone, and we're pretty comfortable. And there's some people out there that are wolves that take advantage of the sheep. And I'm a big believer in all across this country that we need a few sheepdogs. And one of the ways that you're a sheepdog is to have a concealed weapon, to be trained appropriately, have the correct type of background. And if you've done those things, you should be able to carry your concealed weapon anywhere.
And the concealed weapon law in Texas requires training and background checks?
Oh, yes, sir,
okay.
absolutely.
Let me go to the, all right, you're standing up, what the heck? Yes, who am I to be a moderator? But I'll get the gentleman in the way back next, and I'll get the, yeah.
I'm addressing this to Governor Haley, only because he's the senior member here, I think.
In age, perhaps.
Barbour.
Perry's been governor for 200 or 300 years. But I'll take this question.
This is a general question. Does the Republican Party have a plan or an infrastructure to keep all of our congressional candidates on the same page and trying to get control of the Congress? Because where we're going right now is terrifying.
Governor Barbour,
Yeah,
herding the cats question.
You're very right to be focused on this year's election. This is the election that matters. And we can't wait till 2012 to start taking our country back. If you look at the discipline that's been exhibited by our people in Congress, it's pretty high percentage. It's 100% or very close there too. Now that's mostly been to try to defeat bad stuff that the Obama administration's put forward. I hope you're going to continue to see that as long as they keep putting forward bad stuff. You're probably going to see in the fall some effort to say, if we were in power, here's what we'd do instead. We did that in 1994 with pretty good success, and I think you're likely to see something there. But I think you'll see a lot of unity in the elections like we did last year when Bob got elected. The focus is going to be on the economy, jobs, spending, taxes, debt, deficit, interest rates, because that's what's on people's minds. That's what people talk about at the dinner table. That's what they're talking about at the kitchen table. That's what they talk about at the water cooler. That's all he talked about when he ran for governor. It's all Chris Christie talked about when he ran for governor. So I think you're going to see a lot of message discipline, and it's going to be the same set of issues, because that same set of issues transcends Hawaii or Mississippi.
There was a gentleman in the way back that I had, yes, sir, in the blue, sorry.
This is a extremely distinguished panel, and I'm looking at several of the people up there who very shortly, in terms of years, could be the next leader of the free world and president of the United States. I'd like to know what their thoughts might be on strategy for Afghanistan. Do we stay? Do we get out? What do we do?
Afghanistan, start with you, Governor Perry.
I think all of us would probably have been there multiple times. I've certainly been in the theater multiple times. Got 4,500 Texas National Guard troops in either Iraq or Afghanistan at this particular point in time. So we've got we got a little more than a personal interest in what's going on in that part of the world. I think Iraq is a great example of how you can go in and develop a democracy in a part of the world where democracy is very much needed.
Do you think there could be a democracy with our potential troop levels created in Afghanistan?
I think it's a substantially more difficult area. But let me get back to, I want to make a very important statement here to this crowd. This administration and the way that they have treated the great democracy in the Middle East, Israel, is an absolute affront to democracies all across the world. And we have to support those democracies, and it's a long and difficult proposition. I think Afghanistan is a very, very difficult situation. There have been substantial empires, high centering on Afghanistan for centuries, for millennium. Mr. Ambassador, when you think about Alexander the Great, the Raj, the Russians, the great Soviet Union was defeated one time, and that was in the mountains of Afghanistan. I will tell you that I think it is a very, very difficult situation, but one that, frankly, we have to. I think we have to expand the effort. I think we have to expend the
more troops.
Our more troops, because the war on Islamic terrorists is centered in that country. Now, are we fighting the right war? I'll leave that to Petraeus and some guys that have a better handle on it than I do. But I happen to think that Afghanistan is going to be a very, very long, tedious, expensive, and bloody process.
Anybody?
I don't mind talking about this for a moment. And I'll agree with Rick. I'll leave the details of how many troops and that sort of thing to the experts. But I think you need to take a broad view of American history and world history and recognize that today there are still tens of thousands of troops in Japan and Korea 65 years after the end of the Second World War. And that's because it's a very dangerous part of the world, and America is really the only one that can play that role of keeping peace in a critically important part of the world, and important for a number of reasons. So to set artificial deadlines, and while I know that comparison isn't exactly on point because there truly are not people being shot at today in Japan and Korea, and I would concede that, but the fact is it's necessary for our troops, in my opinion, necessary for our troops to remain there. To set an artificial deadline of July 14th of next year or this year or whatever is simply playing into the hands of your enemy. It's just so foolish on the face of it to telegraph when you will be leaving. And for the women in the audience, thank God for America to be in a country where women were treated like pack animals. And while I know the criticism of America being a world policeman, a policeman for the world, and that's often said in a pejorative way, it's part of what makes me proud as an American. And thank goodness there is someone, some country, and some people with us who are willing to play that role. And there have been times when we should have and we didn't. And we're a great country. We're not perfect. Part of our greatness is being willing to go to places that have no direct benefit to us. We're not there for our personal gain as a country, but to help the world to be free and peaceful. And in this case, to help women and to help girls have the right to get up in the morning and go to school and have a decent life. So as a commander-in-chief, as my fellow governors, we're each commanders-in-chief of our National Guard. My guard is deployed twice into Iraq, and I've been there with them in Iraq. They believe in what they're doing, and we need to support them 1,000% during this time and leave it to the experts to determine when and how we're going to fight this war. But even if we do plan to get out, to tell your enemy in advance about that is just about the stupidest thing I can think of.
Haley?
I always love to get to associate my thoughts with those of Little Lingle. The thing, though, I think we need to think about Afghanistan is we need to take a step back and ask, why are we there? This administration, I think the president deserves some credit for doing something very unpopular in his party. For him to have revved up, ratcheted up what we're doing in Afghanistan, most of the left didn't like it. But I also think he doesn't have his eye on the ball. It's not about the good war. This is about the same war we've had since September 11th. Mm-hmm. This is the current theater, the main theater, as Rick said, of the war on terror. But it is still the war on terror. This is not about nation building in Afghanistan. This is not about just keeping Pakistan from becoming the center of Al-Qaeda and Islamic terrorism. That's part of it. We've got to do that. But there's become a problem in my mind where too many people in the United States are being told these are two separate wars. We got Bush's war and we got Obama's war. It's the same war. There's a group of people in the world, and they are a small percentage of Muslims, but there are many, many Muslims, so a small percentage makes a lot of people. And do the math. And there are a lot of people here who want to wipe out our way of life. Their first place, of course, would be Israel. But don't think they'd be finished. If they could wipe Israel off the face of the earth, which will not happen as long as America does what it's supposed to do, but don't think they'd stop there. These are people that want to wipe out our way of life. And so I think we shouldn't look at this as this is the Afghanistan war, this is the Iraqi war, this is Pakistan. We've got to admit that we've got a terrifically dangerous foe because they are so radically wild that they'll murder their own people at the drop of a hat.
I've scanted this side of the room, and there's a gentleman who's been very patient.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, as a native Louisianian, someone who was born and raised in the state of Louisiana and who raises his two kids in Louisiana, we're very proud of Bobby Jindal, and we're very proud of the job he's doing and exhibiting uncommon leadership. You know, he's gone through two horrific disasters as he has been our governor. I just wonder, as I switch topics, as it relates to alternative sources of energy, specifically natural gas, we had the largest natural gas find in American history in the Haynesville Shale. I'm wondering what the governors could speak to in how we could eliminate some of the state and federal red tape that is preventing us from taking full advantage of our of our natural gas plays across the state, which would include the Haynesville
in Colorado.
Shale. Thank you very much.
Who wants to take it?
Don't ever forget that there are lots of people on the left who want you to burn natural gas. They just don't want you to produce it.
That's right. That's why we need refineries as well. Just like in nuclear technology, we have 2 refineries for nuclear energy in the state of Louisiana. I just wonder what else we can do.
You're going to have to
eliminate red tape.
deal. Walter mentioned it. You're going to have to deal with, in most states, whether it's New York, Pennsylvania, or whether it's here in Colorado, the people on the left who want to say that hydraulic fracturing is some sort of threat to the water supply, some sort of threat to something, so that they have an excuse to not allow the production of this natural gas.
Let me address the natural gas issue just a second, because you know, the Haynesville runs over in Louisiana, and that's a nice field, but both the Barnett Shale and the Eagle Ford are monstrously big ones. And Boone Pickens and Gary Morrow, who was a Democrat General Land Office commissioner in Texas in the mid-1990s, stood up and said that we need to be transforming our fleet from petroleum-based, oil-based, gasoline-driven to natural gas. And, you know, everybody gave them a nice, you know, and went on about our business. And the fact of the matter is, we're not many years past $12 an MCF natural gas. And nobody knew these massive amounts of deposits were there. And now our ability to manipulate those and to produce those, and the hydraulic fracking, without hydraulic fracking, the oil and gas industry stops in the United States. But the key is, I think we are now, with these supplies that we have identified, on the cusp of, and I'll go back to, the way you do it is incentive-based regulations, to give incentives to major fleet carriers, to give incentives and directives from the standpoint of governors being able to direct their Texas Department of Transportation, or their the schools are run by the local school districts, 1,100 local school districts, but giving them incentives to make that transformation to natural gas. And I think that's a very important policy issue that we need to be talking about as Republican governors, and coming up with the ideas that work for the states, particularly that are big producers of natural gas across the country. So I think you'll see some states putting incentives in place, and we'll be talking about it in Texas.
Yeah, gentleman right here.
When we talk about education, the thing that comes to mind on my end is safety for our children. 1 out of every 4 girls in this country will be sexually or physically abused, and 1 out of every 7 boys being born today will be sexually or physically abused. Would you be open to a life imprisonment for second-term offenders?
Seth, we may already have it.
May I take it from a different point of view, Seth? And I'll let the others answer that direct question. As a governor, one of our most important and serious and difficult responsibilities and obligations is to respond when we're requested to give a pardon or commute a sentence, and by a pardon, it's you wipe it off someone's record. And I'm like my fellow governors, we review a lot, all kinds of pardons, and I'm a person who believes in redemption of people, but I will not ever pardon anybody. I don't really care what else they've done in life when they have physically and sexually abused children. I just won't do it.
Governor Pawlenty? Yeah.
I think they're different people. There's something about them. They're different.
Seth, we have in Minnesota a system of civil commitment beyond the criminal phase. So in my view, and I think the judgment of many others, there are certain sex offenders who are simply sociopaths, present a current and ongoing and indefinite danger to others, particularly children. And so we have gone to indeterminate sentencing for the most severe of those individuals, and we can keep them behind prison for a long period of time. That makes a lot more sense than civil commitment because it's more affordable and you can keep them in prison longer if they've served their sentence. I think we now have more people per capita and gross in the civil commitment phase, which is once they've served their time, we keep them essentially contained indefinitely until they can prove that they're not a danger to other people, and we haven't let anybody out yet.
Yeah, I'd actually like, because I only have about 4 more minutes and I have 123 hands. Seth, you can come on up and talk to him later, but let me get the gentleman here and the woman in red with the red there. But first, the gentleman there who seems to have a microphone.
In regard to the Financial Reform Act, which was created to help fix the problem that government created. We turned over this process to the 2 people who are most influential, Chris Dodd, Barney Frank, to fix the problem that they created. Without touching the government entities, the GSCs, that led to this problem, Freddie and Fannie. How does a government function to represent the people of this country, make a screw up like that, and then we turn around and we ask them to please fix it?
All right, let me get to the panel.
I'm a little stupid.
Let me get Governor McDonnell in too, if I can, because I haven't heard from him much, but on the financial reform bill.
I think the answer to that will come in November when some of those people get replaced by more clear-thinking people. You know, this Congress, which enjoys about a 20% approval rating, is created the biggest one-size-fits-all, top-down, bureaucratic approach in micromanaging the free enterprise system in modern American history. I think there's a broad agreement in the other party that their job is to micromanage the economy. That's not the essence of a free enterprise system. And so I think that's the way some of those folks think. If you look at the essence of what happened on September 15th of 2008 and why we've had the problems the last couple of years, it goes back to some things that Dodd and company did back in 1999 with the Community Reinvestment Act, forcing banks to make bad loan decisions because it met some arbitrary goal of 70% home ownership. Noble, but if you make the government do things that don't make economic sense, you get this kind of mess. I think the solution is you got to get more free market, conservative people elected to the United States Congress that understand it's local governments and state governments under the 10th Amendment that make the best decisions about what to do about the economy.
Thank you.
I'll get you.
We come from California, and I'd like to hear what Governor Perry has to say about the Arizona immigration law and how it's going to affect a lot of elections, especially in California.
We probably have as much at stake on the issue of border security and immigration as any state. We've got a 1,200-mile border. The entire border with the United States and Mexico is 1,800 miles. 2/3 of it is Texas. And I am greatly disturbed that the debate has been about immigration reform instead of the more important issue of securing the border. Because the fact of the matter is, you cannot have an intellectual conversation about immigration reform until the border is secure. And you know, this has been going on for some time. I mean, we have been having a discussion in this country about this issue for a long, long time. And I think it will take a Republican Congress and a Republican president to finally get it done, because I don't see this administration as going to do anything other than to leverage it as a political issue and try to make this about being racism, when the fact of the matter is it has nothing to do with racism. It has everything to do with about securing the border and the safety of the citizens on both sides of that border. Mexico is our #1 trading partner. We marry each other. We have this intricate, interwoven relationship with Mexico. They owned us back in the, we have a very interesting relationship with Mexico.
Remember the Alamo.
And, yeah, that didn't turn out too good for us. San Jacinto was a better thing that we like to talk about. But here's, let me tell you how I would deal with it. We can sit here and complain about, that the Bush administration had an opportunity to deal with it, the Obama administration's had an opportunity to deal with it. I'm looking for some answers. And we have given this administration some very clear policy answers on how you secure the border. And I happen to think it's pretty simple. It's an issue of, and let me tell you, it is not building a wall from Brownsville to El Paso and hanging left and going 800 more miles. That is not how you secure the border. Now, strategic fencing in the metropolitan areas work. It works as a deterrent and a way to help control the flow of people. But the way that you secure the border with Mexico is with boots on the ground. It is National Guard troops, it is Border Patrol. I think we need an additional 3,000 Border Patrols from Brownsville to El Paso on that 1,200 miles. And while I was training those up, I would have 1,000 plus National Guard troops there on that border to be the presence, the law enforcement's presence. While that is going on, I would also use all the different types of technology that we have available. Since 2005, we have been asking for Predator drones to be flying up and down the border using their forward-looking infrared radar, all of the different techniques that they can use with real-time information coming back to law enforcement. We haven't gotten that done yet. They're training these troops to fly these in Houston, Texas at Ellington Field. They're taking them off every day. Why not fly them to the border, go up and down the border
what about sanctions on employers?
I'll get to that. That's way down the road here.
Okay.
There is a substantial amount of technology that's available. The night vision, the cameras, the motion detectors. You can secure the border along with the fencing and shut it down. We have had our Texas Ranger recon teams. We've had a host of law enforcement that goes in and works with the local and the federal. Our Border Patrol's wonderful people. They're just outgunned and outmanned right now. You can secure the border. That's how you do it. Commit the resources, secure the border. Then you have a discussion about immigration. And simply put, here is how I would do it. I would give individuals who are here in this country illegally 12 months to go register. I would have them go to their consulate. I would have them give their biometric data, both fingerprinting, eye prints, etc. And so we know who all of these individuals are. And you know what's going to happen. The ones that have a record, the ones that are bad actors, the ones that are not over here just looking for work and to help their family and what have you, they're not going to go register. And we will find them. We will find them, and every year you go and swipe your card. As a matter of fact, while you're there getting your biometric data, you are getting the very clear directions on here's where you pay your taxes, here's where you buy your insurance, here's where you get your driver's license, here's how you become a contributing member of the society that you are asking to participate in. Every year you will go down and swipe your card. If you have lived in under the laws of your state, then you will be able to stay in that country for 1 more year. It is a 1-year, basically, work permit. If you want to become a citizen of the United States, there's the line right over there where it's always been. Go get in it and pay the price and the time to become a citizen of the United States. If you break the laws of this state and you break them to the point where you have reached a threshold where we do not think that you are a contributing member of our society, you will be deported. And by the way, the border is secure and you're not walking back over anymore. That is how I would deal with this issue. But you must secure the border first. This isn't one of those that you can do. I don't think you can do it in parallel. I don't think you can do. And the sad thing about Arizona, and frankly, I totally respect and understand what they're doing in Arizona. The law, frankly, I have said there's parts of it I support. There are parts of it I think don't work for Texas, and you know, and I hope nobody gets confused because I don't stand up and say I'm 100% for the Arizona law. Somehow or another, we're not, supporting Arizona. There are just parts of that law that I don't support. Like, for instance, a citizen being able to sue a law enforcement officer and creating a new cause of action in the state of Arizona for a law enforcement officer not doing their job. You all know me, I'm not a big fan of trial lawyers, so creating a new cause of action is not something I'm real excited about. But having 50 different immigration policies is nuts in this country. And we've got to force Washington, we've got to force our new congressional delegation that's going to show up there to address this issue and secure the border. Because I'm telling you, when the governor candidate in Tamaulipas was killed 2 weeks ago, bullets hit the city hall in El Paso week before last from a shootout in Juarez right across the border. It is going to spill over into the United States. It's probably going to spill over into Texas, and we're going to have to deal with it. And I am going to be a very vocal and a very I'm going to be a very pissed off governor when the American people get killed by terrorists because our federal government continues to fail to do their job. It is time for this Congress and this administration to deal with it before American citizens are killed by the terrorists who are using our border as their area of operation.
Right. I think I'd promised you next. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that there's one topic that we haven't discussed, and it pervades all of the other things that we're talking about, and that is the enormous amount of national debt that we've accumulated
so glad you got that.
Over these past years, in the last decade, really, and the continuing budget deficits that are growing at an alarming and unsustainable rate. I don't think there's anybody in Washington that would tell you, that would not agree that we're growing the debt at an unsustainable rate. But in the face of that, the Democratic leadership in the Senate has announced that there will be no budget this year, notwithstanding their statutory requirement to produce one. There won't be one. The leadership in the House has said that they will have a budget, but they're doing nothing to, in fact, produce a budget.
Let me, because this is the most important question, and I don't want to get into the budget process. I really want to hear the key point you made, which is we are in an awesome fiscal mess. How do we get out of it? Haley, and then we'll go down the row.
First of all, you cut spending. And I spent most of my career in Washington, and the idea in Washington of a spending cut is this year spending was supposed to go up 8%. It's only going to go up 5%. So that's a 3% cut. Well, my budget for the fiscal year that just ended, I cut 9.7%. That is, we spent 9.7% less we spent last year. And next year, we're going to spend about 13% less than we spent last year, or actually this year that we're in now. And our worst year is ahead of us. We have to have a balanced budget, but I can tell you, raising taxes is the enemy of controlling spending. That if you raise taxes, you'll never get control of spending. And now is the first time in my lifetime I think we actually have a chance in Washington to actually get control of spending and actually reduce spending. I think the American people are for that.
Let me actually try to get more specific, if I may, which is where do we reduce spending? In fact, could we reduce the military by 8 to 10%? Could we
You
reduce
save
healthcare?
money.
Yeah.
First of all, there's this silly idea that if you cut spending, that you reduce services. Anybody doesn't think there's enough waste in government. We cut spending 9.7%. And I will tell you, I defy anybody in here to find 3 people in Mississippi that can tell the difference.
So you could do that in the military as well,
You can
9%?
do that with everybody. And
Okay,
I think
fine.
you need to start off.
I agree.
Everything's on the table to cut spending, not to raise taxes.
Right, right. Governor McDonnell.
You have put your finger on the most important issue facing America. It is the cancer that will destroy us from within because we will we'll become a debtor nation relying on foreign powers, and the government will consume more and more of the GDP and reduce the money available to the private sector. We're at the National Governors Association this weekend, and President Obama, of course, appointed Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles to be his debt reduction czars. Well, this is what they said. Alan Simpson said, "The pig is dead. There's no more bacon to bring home." And he's absolutely right. The level of spending is unsustainable. In fact, it's worse than you probably think. It's now up with this additional trillion in the deficit this year. It's up to $14 trillion. That's well over $100,000 per American family of 4, about 6 times the average credit card debt of the American family. It's being passed on to our kids and our grandkids. I mean, if we don't get this under control and have the kind of leadership in the Congress to make it an absolute priority to balance the budget immediately, it's going to be a different nation in the near future. I've made that the top priority, as Haley said during the campaign, talking about spending and jobs. And overwhelmingly, that's what the independent voters are caring about, and I think that's why Chris and I got elected. I inherited a $1.8 billion deficit. I announced yesterday we have a $220 million surplus because we focused on...
Let me see if we can get somewhat specific, and maybe I'll throw out one, which is the huge nut, which is healthcare costs. And sometimes when healthcare costs cuts get raised, words like death panels, everything get thrown into the debate. How do we get a true, over the next 10, 15 years, bring the amount we're spending on healthcare, state and federal, down a bit? Is that possible? Anybody?
Well,
Tim.
I'll take a swing at it. First premise from a common sense standpoint is you can't spend more than you have. And so this notion that we take in as a federal government $2.2 trillion and they spent $3.7 trillion last year, counting up to each bad year they've had to $14 trillion, as Bob just said, is only part of the story. They don't count in that calculation the long-term structural deficit of the country, the debt of the country. If you add in entitlements, you add in pensions, you add in the other stuff that's not in the $14 trillion, that number, if you go long-term structural obligations of the United States government, is at least $70 trillion, maybe closer to $100 trillion on $2.2 trillion of revenue. There's no way those numbers work. It's not a matter of being Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. It's a matter of junior high mathematics. You cannot have an enterprise that takes in $2.2 trillion in revenues and service long-term obligations of up to $100 trillion. If they were a bank at more than 30-to-1 leverage, they would have to shut themselves down. It is pathetic. It's reckless. It's unsustainable. It has to be changed. One of the main drivers for school districts, counties, states, the federal government is healthcare on government, healthcare paid by government, and healthcare more broadly. I'll just give you this perspective. Their view of the world is drag it into Washington, D.C., create a one-size-fits-all 1940s bureaucratic-led, government employee-administered, government-centric approach. That is 1940s thinking. We live in the iPad, iPod world. We put information in the hands of individuals about price and quality. We do it quickly. We allow them to make choices for what's right for them and their family efficiently, quickly, and easily. And then as to healthcare specifically, people's behavior changes very differently if they're paying the bill, or some of it. And if you don't believe me, you go watch people at an open bar versus a cash bar. You set up a cash bar versus an open bar, you'll see very different behavior. The same is true in healthcare, and frankly, the same is true in most other public policy issues. A couple of ideas. In Minnesota, we have the highest percentage use of health savings accounts in the country, at 10% of our population. They save somewhere between 5 and 20% compared to alternatives. That's significant. They should be used more broadly, and they should be encouraged more broadly. And then we have to have consumers get good information about price and quality and give them some skin in the game financially to make good decisions. One concrete example, we said to our state employees, we're all going broke with these health care costs. We're going to make some changes. You can go anywhere you want, but if you choose to go somewhere really expensive that doesn't have good results, you're paying more. If you choose to go somewhere that's less expensive, more efficient, with quality results, you'll pay less. Take a wild guess where they go. 90% of them, 90, transition from their old plans to this new approach, and for 5 years in a row, cumulatively, we've had almost zero healthcare cost increases. 3 of the 5 years, zero flat. The other 2 years, close to zero. Almost unheard of in the medical market because of this reality and this piece of common sense. If you're paying the bill, or part of it, you behave differently. And lastly, most of the dough in healthcare is in 5 chronic conditions. It's in obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and how we take care of people at the end of their life. And if you have a chronic condition, where you go get your care and who cares for you affects the outcomes and the price dramatically. And the good news is the best outcomes and the best quality providers are often the most efficient. Consumers don't know that. They go to clinics, doctors, hospitals, and providers because they like the magazines, the nurse smiles at them, it's the parking's easy, something like that. That's all fine as a marginal consideration, but we have to have consumers in the driver's seat in a market if we have any prayer of fixing this thing.
Governor McDonnell, and then I'm going to have Rick, and then I'm going to end with you, Governor Lingle, if I may. You get the, yes.
Well, based on Governor Pawlenty's analysis, Governor Barbour's decided there'll be a cash bar at the RGA reception.
No. Fred has said it's open bar, right?
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, of course.
Let me tell you how bad it is, though, with Medicaid and what this new health care bill does. And, of course, we're not a fan of it. We're the first state to sue in Virginia. But even looking at the finances of it, Medicaid spending in Virginia has grown 1,600% in 25 years, 1,600. I think my fellow governors probably have a similar experience. It now consumes 20% of the overall budget of Virginia. With the unfunded mandates that begin in January of 2014 with this federal health care bill, we're looking at about $1.7 billion of increased spending by the year 2022. That will consume anywhere from 25 to 30% of the total budget. Your situations may be very similar. You can't impose those kinds of unfunded liabilities on states and expect us to maintain the solvency and the other services no matter how much we cut. Unless we have consumers with skin in the game in Medicaid, as Tim said, it's just not going to work. Everybody knows if you don't pay for something, then you want as much of it, you want the best, and you don't care who else pays from it. That is exactly human nature. So more focus on prevention, co-pays, managed care, relaxation of these maintenance of effort rules that have been foisted on us by the federal government, I think have got to be put in place if the legal challenges are sustained, or we are going to have horrible situations in the states in the next decade.
Scrap Obamacare and block grant the states. You've heard the answers right here. These are the champions of innovation. The laboratories of innovation across America are the states. It's the Bobby Jindals, it's the Bob McDonnells, it's the Haleys and the Lindas and the Tims that are out there that are testing the policies that will work. And governors, by and large, as chief executive officers of their states, will take best practices and implement them in their states because we know how to save money. It's been this having to compete with one arm tied behind your back because of the strings that Washington put on the money that they send down to you that's made this untenable. That's the reason that it costs so much. It's the reason that we can't give them as much health care as to many people. So I would suggest that, I can't tell you how important November the 2nd is going to be in electing men and women. And let me just address this issue, if I can, real quick about, I think we're fixing to go through a very, very difficult time as a country. And I think there's no use sugarcoating it. We're fixing to have some of the hardest decisions and difficult decisions to be made all across this country. Let me tell you, California, Michigan, New York are going to have some incredibly difficult decisions that are going to have to be made. And we're going to have men and women who stand up and support these leaders in these states and in Washington, D.C. For the life of me, I don't understand what in the hell we need a Department of Energy for. I don't know why we need a Department of Education. And it's going to take that type of really outside the box. There are going to be things happen over the next 5 years that you're going to sit back and say, dang, I didn't think that could ever happen before. But to save this country, it's going to have to.
Governor Lingle.
Thank you, Walter, and thanks to everyone for listening to us today. I want to talk about the healthcare issue and the deficit issue, all in the same framework, and that is, and it's kind of what Rick was getting at as well. The leaders of our nation have to treat the American people like adults and not like uneducated children, and tell them, we're going to give you more health care, we're going to cover all pre-existing conditions, we're going to cover your children till they're 25, it's going to be cheaper, and you're going to save money on your health insurance. That's what they've told us, and that's treating us as Americans as uneducated children as opposed to adults. So for me, whether it's the debt, the deficit, or health care, I agree with Rick. We're going to go through some very difficult times. You're going to have leaders in Washington who have the courage to speak to you as educated adults, the way we've had to do in the States. Each of us here, we have to balance a budget. We've gone through multi-billion-dollar reductions in revenues. We won't get back to 2008 revenues until 2013 in the state of Hawaii. So our budgets, by definition, had to be cut dramatically. And I had to go to the people and tell them, here's why I had to lay off 1,000 people. I didn't want to do it. I've never met anyone who wants to lay people off. But here's why we had to do it. Here's why we had to have furloughs. Here's why I can't release the money. I know the legislature appropriated it. And I know they said we could spend it, but we can't spend it. And here's why we can't spend it. And you have to take the political heat for being honest with the public. And my experience is the public responds appropriately and understands why. Even though they may want a certain program, you simply can't have it. So I think with the election coming up, as Haley said, this is an important election. Elect people who are going to have the courage to treat the American public like the adults that we are, and quit this fairy tale kind of budgeting that has gone on. It cannot be sustained, and it will hurt us and really mean that our way of life can't continue if we don't get it under control now. Thank
Governors, Fred Malek, thank you all very much for being with us. We appreciate it. I'll try to find 5 Democratic governors who can be as sensible. See you all later. Thank you. Thank you, Brett.
Get to spend a few $1 trillion tomorrow. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I used to be in Selma. I hate to run